Hey everyone. We're going to get started with our base rollup panel. So unfortunately, one of our sponsors, Puffer, had to step out today, so they won't be on the panel. But we have a few folks coming here, and then Ahmad from Nethermind is also coming on shortly. He's stuck in traffic. But we have our EF member, Justin Drake, who's kind of the mastermind behind base rollups, moderating here, and also would love for you to kind of comment as well, in general, Justin Drake, about the state of base rollups as you're tuned into the ecosystem, probably more than many people. And then Evan here is part of the PrimeHub team, and he's been doing a lot of research on base rollups and some of their utilization of mainnet resources and interactions. And also we have Irfan from Interstate, who's been developing a preconfirmation protocol. So with that, yeah, we can kick it off maybe.
Amazing, thank you, Murat. So I guess the panel will grow over time as people come and recover from the traffic. Shall we do a quick round of questions? For example, out of 10, how base pilled are you?
I think I'm trending towards a 10. I'm maybe at like a 7 or 8 right now.
Okay, where did you start?
Maybe like a 2 or a 3.
Common trajectory.
It's because I saw them bleed money and I was like, this is such a stupid idea. And now they're profitable, and now I'm thinking, this could work.
Right, incentives.
10 out of 10. Yeah.
Okay, but where
based is the future.
Where did you start initially, when you first heard of the concept?
Yeah. I guess it takes some time to get into. It's a very niche area. So I think like
right.
I think like a lot of people like it's a little bit of complexity for like a typical app developer to like onboard to. Yeah. So hopefully I think it'll become mainstream where like it makes more sense to be based than be an L1 app. But yeah.
So you think it will become mainstream. So are you saying that we've reached escape velocity and in some sense we've de-risked the research and now it's just a matter of implementing?
Well, I don't know if we've reached marketing velocity,
right.
for sure. But it seems like the guarantees of a base rollup are strictly better than the guarantees of an L1 app. Sans the like additional engineering complexity. Yeah.
Right, complexity. I mean, we were chatting just outside, and you mentioning that complexity might be kind of scary for the L2s. Can you try and expand on that?
Yeah, I think like Kaito is really great. I think like Spire is obviously doing base rollups, but outside of that, there's like not that many people you can buy a base rollup from. So I guess like the nicheness of it is like if I was gonna integrate with something and there's only like 2 people doing it, I'd be a little concerned about. I think maybe in like 6 months once it becomes like very easy, like one click deploy.
Do you agree, Justin, with the complexity of based rollups, and maybe it needs another research cycle or 2 before it's like ready to go to market?
I mean, I think compared to centralized sequencing, it's definitely more complex. But like my take for a long time has been that if you go down the decentralized sequencing route, then you're eating 80–90% of the complexity. And the reason is that if you go down a decentralized sequencer, first of all, you need to make sure that your virtual machine is secure, has no bugs, because now anyone can go permissionlessly attack your system if there is a bug. 2, you need to find a solution for MEV, because the centralized sequencers basically act as a makeshift encrypted mempool. And then 3, you need to have some sort of solution for the fast UX. So either you need to have super low latency consensus, which is going to be like very centralizing, or you need some sort of fancy preconfirmations. And I guess in the case of base sequencing, we don't want to have the super centralized, decentralized sequencer. And so we have to eat the complexity of the preconfirmations. And it's never been done before. And so there is definitely some technical risk there. I guess on that note, Irfan, you were introduced as building preconfirmation infrastructure. What exactly are you building?
Sure. Yeah, we're building a preconf protocol. We're building one like a wallet adapter that wallets can use to send preconf requests. We're building a router that like integrates with like every major preconf network, hopefully, that we open sourced yesterday. And then we're building a sidecar that sits along with that sits into validators and essentially lets them sell block space in advance of the upcoming block. One unique difference, we're very pro like multi-slot. So we're thinking about like how like preconfs can like potentially introduce like some centralization if like not implemented properly. So we're like big fans of like letting two people auction the same slot. So like anti-slot monopolies, which is a very unique, yeah, which is our take. Obviously like preconfs allow for a lot. So I think like all L2s will integrate preconfs. They're already doing it now. For base rollups, they're very central to the design. So we think like all L2s, whether base or not, will use preconfs, and actually are already today.
Okay, great. So basically, there's multiple actors involved in a preconfirmation flow. Obviously, you have the user and the wallet on one end, and the validator on the other end. And it sounds like you're catering for both sides of the market. You have the router that's very close to the wallet and to the user. Then you have the sidecar, which is running in parallel to the validator node.
Yeah. I think today it's very easy for an L2 to use it. They can use it today. Yeah, and obviously like certain L2s like Taiko have their own implementation. Unichain has its own implementation. But we think like, yeah, all L2s like within the span of like 2-3 months, 4 months, or maybe 1 quarter should reasonably implement a preconf protocol. Yeah, this lets them like reduce the L1 block times to like 250 milliseconds or a few seconds. And yeah, I think wallets and apps will use them a little bit slower. Apps need to like start to learn how to self-sequence, and then the wallets, will make sure it's all working before they start.
You mentioned a lot earlier about complexity, and so you're kind of building an entire end-to-end flow with a lot of software assistance on basically every level. For someone who wants to adopt a based rollup, let's say tomorrow, and they go to you and they're like, how can we become based? What's your answer for them? Like, is there just too much complexity right now to make it, as simple as, let's say, conduit, where you can just spin up a rollup really fast? Like how should people think about complexity to become a based rollup today, and where do you see that shifting in the next, let's say, quarter, 1 to 2 quarters?
So yeah, I'll start with to answer like complexity. I think for inclusion preconf itself, I think a simple inclusion preconf is actually very simple. It's just a very simple thing it's very simple. Like Taiko has it out in production. Unichain has it out. So I think a basic inclusion preconf is just a very simple thing to do. So it doesn't really add that much complexity. In terms of complexity, yeah, the complexity is around like launching your own base rollup. That's complex because you need searchers and you need MEV searchers to start operating on your L2. You want them to like generate block value. There's stuff around profitability. I think this has to do with like the L2 searchers not working on the base rollup yet. You need the other part of the supply chain, the block builders, to start looking into your L2, extracting value there for your L2 to be profitable. And then that is like, that's a little complicated to do, yeah.
So on that point, I've always had like a bit of a rebuttal, and I'd be curious to hear what you think. So basically, my rebuttal is that you don't need the builders to become builders for base rollups. You just need the searchers to do it. And there's a very long tail of searchers. And what the searchers do is that they basically specialize in finding like any ounce of MEV. Even they'll put in a lot of effort just to extract, just a few dollars of MEV. And what I expect will happen is that we're going to have base rollup searchers that will send their bundles to the builders. But even if that doesn't happen, from day one, what can happen is that the individual teams running the base rollups can spin up their own searcher and kind of subsidize the blocks, even like with a few pennies. And that's going to be enough to get those bundles on chain, and therefore the L1 blocks, the base rollup blocks to go on the L1. Does that make sense as an argument?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, you can run your own searcher as the based L2. From the app perspective, like, what do you think will be the end state of the profitability of the app? Say, like, I can either like launch as an L1, or I can launch my own single sequencer L2, or it can be a base rollup. Like, what do you think the end state of the profitability for the person that kind of chooses to be in the middle and be there?
So the question is, what is the incentive trade-off between being an L1 and being a base rollup?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the way that I think about it is that if you're an L1, you need to pay for your own economic security. So if you're an application that requires large amounts of economic security, then it's like supplying your own army. That's going to be almost impossible. And if you are successful in having billions of dollars of economic security, you're going to pay a lot of issuance for that. I guess the downside with building as an L2 is that now you need to pay for data availability and for settlement, and that's kind of also an ongoing cost. I guess the good news is that in addition to having security, you also have composability. So, like, my driving thesis here is that for many applications that require being connected to the graph of the Internet of Value, they will have no choice but to be on the same chain. And so, sure, it is a cost, but it's one which comes with many benefits: the security and the composability. And then there's the whole story around scalability, whereby I have this saying that we're moving towards 10 million transactions over the next 10 years, 10 million transactions per second. We start with the base chain that can only do 10, and then we multiply by 100 with rollups. We multiply by another 100 with dank sharding, and then we multiply by another 100 with Nielsen's law that compounds over 10 years. Nielsen's law being the equivalent of Moore's law for bandwidth. And so what I expect will happen is that there's going to be such a supply of data availability that the fee per transaction will be extremely low. But that in some sense is orthogonal to what it means to be a base rollup. That's just the realities of being a rollup. I guess the whole point of base rollups is that not only do you have the shared security, but you also have the shared synchronous composability. So you get all of the network effects benefits that Ethereum has to offer, not just one of them.
I think that the way Taiko is approaching profitability is they have a fee sharing model where the L2 builder will pay a part of the fee to, like, the Taiko treasury, for example, and then the other part of the fee will go towards the builder, so L1, and then the rest of it goes to the searcher. So everyone kind of profits in that regard. And today we see Taiko blobs have maybe 10 to 15% capacity in their blob space, and once it seems that, and they're already technically profitable. So it seems that it's more of a matter of scaling. Once you can, if you're only at 10% blob capacity, you can 10x that in terms of your L1 base cost efficiency and get even more profitability out of that. Each L2 transaction costs less because you're batching them. But I guess I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about what maybe the scaling restrictions are for based rollups. Like, is it just as simple as, you only have so many blobs? We might go to 10 next year. We'll see how Petra goes, 10 to 12. But you only have so much data availability throughput, so that is it even feasible to get, let's say like 1,000 transactions per second across all rollups, let alone based rollups?
Right. So I think one of the big kind of short-term pain points for base rollups is that Taiko, for example, is trying to settle on-chain very often, maybe once per slot, and that's extremely expensive, if anything, for the 21,000 gas overhead that they have to pay. And so the obvious solution here is to have sharing of settlement transactions and blobs. so that a single transaction can settle all of the base rollups. So effectively, the overhead per rollup is 21,000 divided by n, the number of rollups. And this is something that we started working on during sequencing week, and I think it's a really low-hanging fruit. And not only can you pack the blobs together and reuse this one transaction to settle everyone, but you can also do shared data compression. So it turns out that the more data you're compressing, the better the compression ratios. And so there are benefits to batching everything. Now, today, some of the rollups, maybe Arbitrum will only settle once a minute or once every 2 minutes. And I think the reason is that they don't have any need to settle quickly because they don't have synchronous composability. But as soon as synchronous composability becomes something that the users demand because it's available, then there will naturally be an incentive to withdraw every slot. Like, surely if Arbitrum has tens of millions of users, at least some reasonably large subset of those users will want to enjoy the synchronous composability within 12 seconds. And so my base case is that every rollup cluster that's successful will be settling every single slot. And so the overhead of 21,000 gas is going to be shared across all of the successful clusters, not just the base cluster. Ahmad, welcome.
Hey, first, apologies for being late. Traffic here is
crazy.
awful.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. One thing about the same topic that you're mentioning is that one additional solution, short-term solution, before we have composability with the base layer would be that preconfirmations would provide the ability to base protocols to potentially, the preconfirm can aggregate multiple L2 blocks, even in multiple slots on the L1 before actually pushing all of them in a single blob. So instead of pushing every slot, you would basically just keep preconfirming batches, batch after batch after batch. And then at the end, once enough batches are there, you try to push it to L1. In the mempool or in your slot, you first include it with a constraint. This is something that we are looking into as well.
Interesting. So I guess one thing you could do is you could say, we're a base rollup where the slot duration is 1 minute, 5 slots. And then now, because of thanks to preconfirmations, you get the really fast UX and you get the batching over a whole minute.
Yeah.
Nice, that makes sense. Ahmad, do you want to share briefly what you're working on?
So recently we started working on Surge. Surge is basically a base rollup that is a fork of Taiko, but it's a little bit different. That first we focus on no users, so we're not in the business of acquiring users. We are in the business of creating the playground for AI agents, builders, and innovators in the based and preconfirmation and composability space to experiment with our rollup. We are also aiming to be stage 2 from the beginning, so no Security Council, no TEE, so we're planning ZK proving. But it comes with the caveat that ZK proving hasn't been battle tested, but so you only deposit on your own responsibility if you trust ZK technology enough, unless we find a way to mitigate that somehow. But yeah, this is the general plan. Of course, we're pushing the throughput with Nethermind execution client, maintaining higher than. So we've recently hit a milestone with maintaining gigagas per second.
Congrats.
Thank you. So we're trying to push the limit. Of course, blobs themselves will not allow that many transactions to be included. So we're going to see how, like, the average transaction size, if you multiply it to reach gigagas, it won't fit in a single blob, basically. So we're trying to push things, but there are DA limitations as well.
And so to sustain a gigagas, how much blob space do you need per block? Just for the a single gigagas rollup.
I mean, we did the calculation previously, but it's in like tens. Like, so yeah, 12 blobs or something like that. If we're speaking about transactions that are in the average size of transactions on the L2. I mean, you can potentially create a very tiny transaction that consumes a lot of gas. And this use case would probably thrive on Surge because Surge is so fast that it can process this. But yeah, average transaction sizes, we don't have enough DA to fit them as of now.
Tens per second or tens per block?
Per L1 block.
Okay.
Yeah, to reach that 1 gigagas per second. So yeah, tens. I don't have the exact number, but I can get back to you on that.
Do you think in like a post, like once we solve like the DA problem of DA, once we solve base rollups, do you think there's like a benefit to the L1 app being on the L1? Like, do you think all L1 apps should natively be a base rollup instead?
I mean, I'm a big advocate of L2 to L1 composability more than L2 to L2 interop because I think that, personal opinion, by the way, any interop between L2s should go through the settlement layer, which is L1. So my personal opinion is that if we can settle everything on L1, composability could be potentially solved. And we can have like synchronous composability basically in the same block. But yeah, so apps should move to L2s, and then with synchronous composability, you can keep your liquidity and assets, valuable assets, on the L1, and then with synchronous composability, just put them in where the L2 that you want to transact on, do the transaction, and then back to L1 in the same exact block. Something similar to what Tycho Gveneth is aiming to do is like something I think is ideal.
I mean, in order to optimize the gas cost when you go to the L1, do you agree that there should probably be a shared bridge or shared deposit layer, which is maximally simple, incredibly neutral, but it's like kind of layer 1.5 or kind of closer to 2 than it is to 1?
The simpler the bridge
Yeah.
and the liquidity, shared liquidity contract,
Yeah.
the lower the cost of this composable transaction would become.
Yes.
Since we are like not pushing the gas limit on the L1 as much as to accommodate this. So yeah, potentially yes.
Nice.
This would lead to better interop. This is something that is being worked on potentially between Surge and Tycho. So just to showcase how we can like potentially do shared composability or shared interop between the two, up for discussion still, but it was discussed before. Yeah.
So Ahmad, when we started, the first question was, out of 10, how base pilled are you?
Out of 10?
How base pilled are you?
Oh, super.
Okay.
I think,
Off the chart.
yeah, I mean, I think that all rollups should potentially become based unless they don't care about censorship resistant and decentralization as much. But if these values, if you align with these values, then you must be a based rollup. And because I work on the L1 as a core developer, these values are enshrined in me, so I'm not gonna like.
And was this
compromise.
Obvious to you from day one? Like when you first learned about base rollup, how bought in were you out of 10?
Yeah, it grew on me as it went. But yeah, once I knew what could be accomplished with base rollup and the censorship resistant aspect that is currently does not exist in any other rollup type. Even when we look at stage 1 rollups right now, stage 2 rollups, potentially they have conditions about self-sequencing that their sequencer should be down for a while before you can include your transaction, which means that if they intend to censor your transaction, they can just keep running their sequencer and your transaction will never go in. Where base rollup do not have that property.
Right. And talking about censorship resistance, the plan is for the L1 to improve its censorship resistance over time with inclusion lists and whatnot. So you kind of get the benefits for free of better sequencers as the L1 improves over time.
Exactly. And some people would say that preconfirmations reduce the baseness of the based rollups, which is true because with preconfirmations, you kind of like need to queue inbox transactions that are coming into your inbox. After the preconfirmations happen, like you suggested in one of your articles or on one of the calls, I don't remember exactly. But basically, these queued transactions would be included then after the preconf transaction have landed on L1. This would be interesting to hear from others as well. What are their plans if they're interested in building preconfirmations? What are their plans for implementing execution preconfs while also maintaining baseness of based rollups.
Right. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So you want to maintain the execution preconfs. So the specific question was around allowing not damaging the baseness of the rollup while including L1 execution preconfs. Yes. Yeah, I think yeah, obviously with the execution preconf you have like single proposer that can decide what goes in. So I guess you do have like you do lose like some censorship resistance. That single proposer can decide all inputs. You are outsourcing that to like one entity. But it's rotating sequencers. So I think like unless you have like a slot monopoly for like a certain number of slots, I think it's very hard for like a set of you have a million one validators on Ethereum. I think it's hard for like multiple slots in a row to collude. Like statistically.
Okay, but in the future where centralized gateways are dominating the preconfirmation market because they're just faster than any other solution, don't you feel that there should be an ability for people to include self-sequence transactions even if the gateway did not include that transaction or had to censor it for whatever reason?
So to be clear, it's an L2 user who wants a preconfirmation on L1, and do they want a synchronous preconfirmation, in which case, or just a simple inclusion guarantee?
We're not talking about, like, yeah, it could be just, I want to include this L2 transaction in, that's it.
And so then maybe the weak point here is the gateway itself. If it doesn't want to include the preconfirmation, then I guess like how else is it going to go through?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, gateways like do need to exclude some types of transactions naturally, because if you're getting a lot of searchers, like searcher flow will like almost always be like bad flow for the preconf. So one for about preconf centralization, I think like one is like having multiple providers per slot. Two, I'm a pretty big fan of actually like I think the short term you have multiple providers per slot. And I think I actually like multi-proposer like overall. As like another answer. It also helps reduce builder centralization. And then, yeah, if you do have a preconfirm though, you do need like a permission gateway because someone can just spam you. You'll have the same problems as Solana where people just continuously spam. And you have bad order flow too from like searchers.
So your question got me thinking, and actually I only just made a realization, which is that so right now, if you want to use the L1 as a forced kind of inclusion mechanism, the transactions that you forced include don't get the benefits of batching, right? Because, for example, if the Arbitrum sequencer were to censor, they get excellent batching for all the tens of thousands of transactions, but this one transaction gets no batching. When we have inclusion lists, the beauty of inclusion lists is that it doesn't consume any data availability, but it forces the builder to include that transaction in the blobs or in the block. And so now the rational move for the builder is actually to take that transaction and include it in the shared data compression. So now we have best-in-class, not only censorship resistance, but also fairness in terms of the fees being paid by the person who wants to force include. But yeah, fundamentally, you still have the possibility of pre-confirmation censorship where some subset of transactions have to wait the full slot duration as opposed to the default, which is that you get one within 100 milliseconds. But that's pretty fundamental.
I still think that queue in box would be good to implement regardless if we have that or not, just to have that extra level of baseness. Like there is no one can prevent you from inputting your transaction in.
Yes.
And with inclusion lists, yes, that would be even made sure even more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the batching entity be ultimately decide whether you get in the batch or not, and so would be the centralizing point here?
So the idea of queued inbox is that preconfer can batch his transactions, and then any other transaction that has came to the queue of the inbox can then be included afterwards. Just so it does not invalidate any of the transactions that has been execution preconfed already. And at the same time, you have that censorship resistance element that even if the sequencer did not include them, this transaction got in somehow. Of course, the person who is trying to put it in has to pay L1 gas, which could be very expensive. But censorship resistance does not guarantee, like the property of censorship does not guarantee cheap inclusion, but guarantees inclusion in general.
But with inclusion lists, you can guarantee cheap inclusion. That is the thing that I only just realized. And the reason is that when you put a transaction in an inclusion list, there's actually no DA. You're not consuming any DA. This is the really subtle point. And instead, you're basically forcing the builders to include that transaction. And then the smart contract can say that if you want to include transactions in a given slot, it all has to be compressed in one go.
So there is some technical things that could prevent this from working, but I'd love to discuss it with you over some tea.
Sounds good. Perfect.
Just one final question about the batching mechanism. Would you think that this is a first come first serve type batching mechanism, or a bidding mechanism?
I mean, I'm a big fan of batching mechanisms because I think that first come first serve requires centralization with the gateways, and it could also be susceptible to the same issue that Solana has with spamming, bot spamming. So I'm a fan of just picking up transactions from the mempool, batching them based on profitability, and taking that juicy priority fee to the preconfer. I know that it does not guarantee that very low latency that centralized solutions would provide. So maybe a hybrid solution between the two would be optimal. I would love to see how it evolves.
Any questions from the audience?
Great panel. I don't know, maybe Justin, if you can illuminate a little bit on the progression of going from base rollups to native rollups, and in your mind, what does that look like, and maybe loosely time frame you're thinking.
Yeah, so base rollups and native rollups are completely orthogonal directions. So the native word basically applies to the virtual machine. And it's basically saying that your virtual machine is an exact copy of the L1 EVM. And then you have the base rollups, which is all about the sequencer. And you have full freedom to choose any sequencer and any virtual machine. But if you're both based and native, then basically you're saying that for both the sequencer and the virtual machine, I want to use the same thing as Ethereum L1. Now, in terms of native rollups, which is I guess a medium-term story because it's going to require a hard fork to add a precompile, it provides two big benefits. Benefit number one is that if you want to be EVM equivalent, you don't have to re-implement the EVM as a circuit or as a fraud proof. And it means that you won't have any bugs by construction. By construction, it is an exact copy of the L1 EVM because that's what the validators will be verifying. And then the second big advantage is that you're equivalent even during hard forks of the EVM. So if the EVM does a hard fork to add an opcode, well, the precompile will magically upgrade at the same time as the L1 EVM. So it means that you can have virtual machines that don't need governance to maintain them, which is a fantastic outcome for security. And unfortunately, it's going to take years to get that precompiled, but I think when we get it, it will be fantastic. And there's two big benefits to this precompile. One is that we're going to be able to vertically scale the L1, which means raising the gas limit maybe by 10x or 100x, because The validators, they'll be just verifying a SNOC, which takes a millisecond to verify. And so there won't be this denial of service attack vector, which is the whole reason for having the gas limit. And then 2, we'll have programmable execution sharding, meaning that anyone can deploy a native rollup, which is a copy of the EVM, and they can deploy as many as they want, as opposed to a fixed number of shards. And they can program around it the sequencer, the governance token, the fee token, the public goods funding, whatever it is. And so, yeah, I think the future is very, very bright for Ethereum. In some sense, we're making a huge use of ZK, and it's something that's very, very unique to Ethereum as an ecosystem.
So if I understand correctly, you could be native without being based. So
Correct.
You could use a different sequencer for that. Excellent. And then just one more follow-up. Would this native rollup allow for dynamic sharding, like at runtime?
So you can think of it as a precompile to deploy as many instances as you want. So it's dynamic in the sense that at any slot you can add a new instance. But if you want to have this dynamic aspect to it, then that would have to be like an extra layer of complexity on top of your rollup. If you want to have like one entry point for all of your users, and then behind the scenes it's kind of sharded dynamically, you're going to need some sort of load balancing mechanism that happens behind the scene, which the precompile doesn't provide by default, but maybe you can build on top.
Hey, Ahmad, you said that FCFS would lead to centralization. I'm not sure I clearly understand why it would lead to more centralization.
Sorry, what would lead to centralization?
First come, first serve.
Oh, first come, first serve. So to do first come, first serve, you need an endpoint that will provide you with that very low latency where you would send the transaction and it would, in less than 100 millisecond or around 100 millisecond, provide you with a preconfirmation. Of course, this user experience is amazing, and it would be something that is desirable in the industry, given that the competition already has that kind of user experience. And we've seen it in, for example, rollups like Arbitrum. They provide very, very, very short confirmation times, which is great for the user experience on that chain. But the caveat here is that this is not a decentralized solution, because at the end of the day, the user needs to send this transaction to a server. It's not that he needs to send it to a mempool, and then this mempool shares it with a lot of nodes, and then someone picks it out from the mempool. So all of this disappears, and you end up with only like a bunch of servers behind the load balancer that just receive these transactions and provide you with the confirmation. And that's the centralization that I'm talking about.
Right, but essentially, isn't this what like preconfers are doing anyway? Like in the sense that the preconfers have access to a bunch of transactions. These can be like probably like someone who wants FCFS is probably paying a little higher amount of priority fee or like preconfirmation fee, and essentially preconfers are going to do what best suits them, right? Like, why do you think like it's going to lead to additional centralization than what it already has, right?
You want to ask?
Yeah, preconfers are like a fast fast path. So it's out of protocol. So yeah, if you have execution preconfs like first come first serve, you're effectively doing what Solana does. You have like the single node, rotates every few seconds. Yes, so you have like similar problems to Solana. But this is like an out of protocol fast path. So the difference is it's not in protocol, and if you want to use a decentralized approach, you just like submit a normal transaction the way you were before. And yeah, and then I think there was the second part of the question.
Yeah, so the pre-confirmation solutions actually are divided into two types. So one pre-confirmation solution depends on what you just described, which is basically gateways receiving those transactions and pre-confing them super quick. And that these could be multiple providers, of course, which would reduce the centralization. But there are other pre-confirmation solutions that basically provide you with a faster confirmation times than what you would get on mainnet. So instead of 20 seconds confirmation time, you can get 1 second confirmation time. But at the same time, they still depend on the same mechanism of the transaction landing on the mempool, being communicated between the nodes, and then they pick the most profitable transactions out of the mempool, batch them up, and submit them. With this way, it's not that you have to send your transaction to a singular entity to provide you the pre-confirmation. In this way, you can send your transaction to any node that is running this chain, whether it's Tyco or any other base chain, and potentially get it picked up by one of the registered preconfers. And with a permissionless preconfing solution, any validator then on the mainnet can then opt in by running just by running a sidecar next to his validator, and then they would get the ability to preconf transactions permissionlessly and also in a kind of decentralized manner, which is the second type of pre-confirmation solutions that I'm talking about.
Two minutes. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to go deep on that question of centralization because it's a common concern. I mean, my take is that within the one slot, you fundamentally have centralization because there's one proposer who has monopoly rights over everyone. And the other point that I would make is basically you want to reduce centralization points that are between the user and the proposer. And right now, there's two. There's the relays and the builders. And there's basically 2 relays and 2 builders that do most of the relaying and the building. And the good news with preconfirmations is that there is the potential to remove builders from the equation. And the reason is that when you want a preconfirmation, as a user, you send it directly to the proposer, or in the case of a gateway, to the gateway on behalf of the proposer. But now let's look at what it means to be a gateway. Unlike a builder, you don't need any financial sophistication. All you need to do is have very high DevOps skills to be able to run an auction, to do the tip pricing, but you yourself don't need to be financially sophisticated. And so that is a similar centralization profile to the relays, but we're removing this one entity, which is the builder. So I actually think that ultimately the centralization for preconfirmations is lower than the status quo with the builders. And concretely, hey, Kaito, just on time.
I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaito, co-founder at Spire. Nice to meet you.
Out of 10, how base-pilled are you?
10.
And when you first heard of base rollups, how base-pilled were you?
1.
Oh, okay. So this is a very, very common trajectory where you start very low and then you go up. What was your thinking when you first heard of base rollups?
What?
Why did you not like them initially?
The cost of the cost of transactions when you touch the L1 state.
Mm-hmm.
But we found out that there are many ways of reducing the costs. One is like network effect of the base rollups, the unified of base rollups, and also we are working on the blob sharing or data compression. Nice. Which we will announce or release some research or paper very soon. So,
wow, super exciting. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for this closing statement. Thank you, guys.
So I'd like to thank Justin for taking the time and moderating this, but we definitely have a few minutes of questions for the panel. Justin has to go to his next speech, unfortunately, but if there are any questions from the audience about base rollups for the panel, we have some awesome founders and participants and protocol builders here. Feel free.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Kaito, if I said your name correctly. What is your thesis around based app chains, and why do you think this is maybe like a better approach than something like application-specific sequencing?
Yeah, so the thesis, our thesis is really like the based chain thesis. So the maximize customizability of chains. So that's the main reason, and still maintaining the network effect of Ethereum L1. So what I want to, what I expecting is like alternative VM can tap into liquidity of Ethereum or network effect of Ethereum. So just, yeah, so the freedom of the development. So that's the current core thesis, option thesis. Nothing new. It's just the keep both of Ethereum and option thesis.
Ahmed, this is for you. You mentioned the second type of non-gateway based sequencing. Is that something you guys are working on with the, you said Surge or Search? And who else also is like doing good work here?
Yeah, so actually that came along way before Surge was thought about or announced. We were working from a grant from Tyco on designing and engineering a preconfing solution. And this is the solution that we came up with. And then now we might ship it to actually be implemented on potentially, hopefully, on Tyco.
Well, you'd have to use like EigenDA though, right?
Not necessarily, no. EigenDA is not related here at all. But if you meant EigenLayer, then not necessarily, because...
I meant for if you ship Surge, you need data availability.
Oh,
right?
For Surge and data availability, currently we are not going to aim for 1 gigagas per second right away. So this is a long-term goal. We're going to start with something more mediocre. So let's say 1 gigagas per L1 slot, or let's say 2 gigagas per L1 slot, and see how it goes from there.
Cool. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you guys for great base rollup panel. Let's thank our panelists here.